Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Andrei Tarkovsky's final film, The Sacrifice from 1986. If you haven't seen The Sacrifice, I would recommend that you turn off this video at this point. I will be talking about some plot points, characters, and camera technique. So I want to give you a chance to turn off the video. As you know from the previous videos, I've been really studying Tarkovsky's filmography. This is his last film. This film was made while he was apparently dying of cancer. And so it has a lot of the familiar elements of a Tarkovsky film, which I'll be talking about. So one of my favorite parts of the film is the beginning of the movie. And I'll just give a slight plot summary, which you don't find out until probably the middle of the movie. But basically, the world is being threatened by a World War III type scenario. And the main character is looking for some way to resolve that, if he can, in his own way. This movie takes place on an island in Sweden. And features Erland Josephson, who is an actor from Ingmar Bergman films. So it's great to see him back again after seeing him in Nostalgia from 1983. So the opening very much reminds me of the Virgin Spring from Ingmar Bergman, because you see a tree at the beginning. It happens to be a dead tree, and in Virgin Spring it's a live tree. But Erland Josephson is spending time with a child that you assume is probably his grandchild. And it's really the opening of the film. It's a very long take also to open up the film. You see him watering this tree, telling stories, talking quite a bit. And then the camera moves and shows another character, the postman, riding on a bicycle, and they sort of move along the landscape. And it's very interesting also to see this motif of a bicycle. It reminded me of Nostalgia, where Erland Josephson plays kind of a crazy man, and he's riding a bicycle that doesn't go anywhere. So you get this idea that we're moving, but we're not necessarily going anywhere, which you get with the bicycle. The character riding the bicycle kind of weaves in and out and goes back and forth, and there's even one part where his bicycle is attached to a branch with a rope. And so he gets pulled off the bicycle, which is kind of interesting. But I like this idea of the bicycle, and also the fact that the wheels are a circle, of course, and it's kind of a circle of life type theme as well, which I'll get into a little bit later. Some of my favorite lines from this opening segment, I'm just going to read this here, is: "We live, we have our ups and downs, we hope, we wait for something, we lose hope. We move closer to death and are born again to remember nothing, and remember nothing." So again, to me, this final film is really Tarkovsky not only talking about this story where there's this impending devastation and destruction, but he's talking, to me anyway, about life itself, where there's birth, death, rebirth, and it's just happening in this kind of a cyclical fashion. And I really enjoy that about his work. I really feel like most of his films, but this one in particular, has elements of that. What I've been talking about in some of the previous videos, in that there are these earth elements like water, fire, wind, those types of things, air. So again, you get this idea of the eternal circle of life. I wanted to talk about some of the other things that I saw in this movie that seem very familiar. So there's something that you see in Ivan's childhood is close-up of hands, and there's a scene also where Erland Josephson is washing his hands, and so you see hands in water. You see paintings that a character might be looking at, a book of paintings in this particular film, and the viewer is drawn into those paintings, much like the person who's looking through the book. And this seems to be, again, a very familiar technique with Tarkovsky, in that he draws the viewer into whatever the character is looking at. So you really feel like you're part of the film. And one of the other things I noticed, one of the things I discovered, I've only watched a few of the supplements related to Tarkovsky's films, but one of the supplements I watched on the Criterion channel, where I've been watching all of these films, is that Tarkovsky wants you to be a co-creator. As the viewer, he wants you to be a co-creator in his film, which is pretty amazing, because then each viewer can potentially have an individual experience watching this film based on their own experiences, based on their own life, and so I found that a really great aspect. You don't find this with a lot of filmmakers, where they're really drawing you into that. And the way I feel he does that is with some of these techniques, including what I've talked about before, breaking the fourth wall, where a character is looking directly at you and really engaging you in what is happening, even though they may be looking at another character. With The Sacrifice, you realize that, and believe it's mentioned in the film that every gift involves a sacrifice. So the gift of life involves a sacrifice. What is that sacrifice specifically? In the context of the movie, it is the main character, Alexander, played by Erland Josephson, trying to find an answer to this issue, trying to resolve not only his own issues, but also this larger issue of that the world might be ending. Whether he can solve that or not is really unknown through the film, but he really tries to do that through a variety of ways. I believe in the sacrifice that Tarkovsky is giving a nod to a playwright by the name of Anton Chekhov, who I'm a big fan of. And I really feel that, especially in the scenes in the house, they very much look like a theater set. As I mentioned with nostalgia, it's very much like a theater set. The bedrooms, the living room, the way the characters are portrayed, you could almost see it as a stage play. There's another element, too, that is very common with a Chekhov play, in that in a Chekhov play, sometimes Anton Chekhov will show you a gun in the first act, and you know that he's going to use it in the third act. Well, in this, the beginning of the film, you see Erland Josephson reaching into a bag and pulling out a gun, and you're assuming at some point that it will be used. Now, it's not used in this movie the way you might expect it to be used, but it is used in what I would call the third act of the movie. So to me, Tarkovsky is kind of tipping his hat to Chekhov there. I could be totally wrong, but I really feel like that, having seen a lot of the Chekhov plays. I feel like he is tipping his hat, if you will, to Chekhov, who was a Russian playwright. This movie is very dark and brooding, and it's really Tarkovsky confronting his own mortality, I believe, also. And at the end of the film, you see a very amazing sequence, one of the most amazing sequences I've seen on film, where Alexander, the main character, again, Erland Josephson, is back at the main house that's featured in this movie, and he essentially sets the house on fire. And it's just an amazing sequence. It's one of the longest, I think, sequences in a Tarkovsky film, where it's basically a 10-minute non-stop long take, from the house being burnt to the family coming back to see Alexander and trying to understand what's happening with the house. Of course, this is the house that they've been living in on the island, and there's an ambulance that comes in and tries to take Alexander in the ambulance, and there's kind of a lot of tussling around with the characters. So you see the fire, you also see that the characters are walking in water, there are trees. It just brings all these elements together of living. And to me, I feel like the burning of the house is really symbolic of our, life ending. Philosophically and spiritually, you can think of your body as a house, and potentially ending at some point, right? That's part of life and death. And so, again, we come back to, at the end of the film, we come back to the circle of life, the cyclical nature of life itself, going from birth, water, to death, maybe fire. And so I really enjoyed this film a lot. It's going to be on my list, on the top of my list for Tarkovsky films. There's another beautiful scene, a segment, where Erland Josephson is looking into a reflection of a painting, and it's one of the most magnificent scenes I've seen. Again, bringing all these elements together of reflection and mirrors, and again, very spiritual, not only reflecting on life, but Tarkovsky reflecting on his work, reflecting on his own life, I believe, in this movie. It's just amazing. You see also, not only with the bicycle, I've talked a little bit about the bicycle, but there's also people falling. The characters fall in sort of an unnatural way. They might just be walking on the floor, and then all of a sudden they're on the ground. They've fallen for some reason. Erland Josephson does this. The postman does this as well. And so in the bicycle, Erland Josephson is riding a bicycle down a road at one point, and you see him coming on this long road, and there's a couple of puddles in the foreground, and when he gets to the puddles, he falls on his bicycle for no apparent reason. It seems like he could have potentially made it past the puddles, but he falls. And I feel like this, again, to me, is a theme of endurance. People fall and they get up. And so we have our ups and downs. That's basically what I mentioned in the beginning with these quotations. And that's part of life. We have our ups and downs, right? We fall and we get up. I feel like this movie very much relates to what's happening in the world today. We must continue to endure. We must continue to have hope. And I am hopeful when I see this movie as well, as much as the plot of the movie is pretty devastating potentially, and you only get a few glimpses of what World War III must be like. You hear planes going over, you hear a radio and things like that. But at the end of the day, we have to endure. We have to have hope. And so I really, through this study of Tarkovsky films, have found a lot of hope. Specifically, also with this film, you see kind of the beginning and the end of the film as kind of bookends, right? You're at the end of the film, you're back at the tree. The child is there. To me, Tarkovsky bookends his films, this one in particular, with some rays of hope. That even though the house is burned down and all these things have happened in World War III, you still have nature, you still have your life, you're still watering a tree that may not come back to life. So anyway, I really love this film, and I hope you've enjoyed going through this journey with me if you've been watching these videos. I'm planning to put together a wrap-up video, and I'll talk about my watch order, and I'll talk about my final ranking of these movies, which I'm sure I'll be watching many more times throughout my life. So thanks for watching today. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, click on like. If you could, it'd be great to subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. You can click on the notification bell so you'll know when I upload a new video. I sincerely hope everyone is safe and well. And thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.